Hello and welcome to the next series of sociology lessons. I want you to consider some general questions first. Think about your answers to these questions. Just the first idea or thought that comes into your head is going to be useful here for what we're going to have a look at. Similarly here, here, and although not posed as a question directly, why do you think that this is the case? Hopefully, when you answered some of those questions, you were able to apply some of your sociological knowledge and understanding of theory, and for those questions that weren't so obviously sociological, hopefully you thought of some answers that were perhaps more sociological than you would have provided if you hadn't decided to study sociology. Our next topic comes under the broad heading of theory and methods, or to be more precise, as I've typed here, Year 2 theory and methods. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the section and introduce some of the main ideas, some of which you will already be familiar with. When revising for paper 1, and specifically question 6 on paper 1, I said that it would be on theory and methods, and as always the question will come from the specification. I also said that this means that for your end of year 1 exams, your 10-mark question on theory and methods could come from any one of those areas highlighted in yellow, but by the end of year 2 and your final exams, it could include any of these, either yellow or pink in this case. Therefore, year 2 theory and methods covers the pink parts of the specification, as shown here and here, although as you've already done this, we won't spend time in year 2 on the research methods again, although we will enhance our knowledge with further links between theory and methods. These are the main areas of focus for year 2 theory and methods, as noted here. As you can see from this overview of the exam paper structure, theory and methods is examined on paper 1, as you have done for year 1 exams, but as per previous discussion, note this could now include year 2 content that we're about to cover, as well as the final exam for paper 1. Please also note that theory and methods is also examined via the exact same specification as part of paper 3 as well. Indeed, there will be a 10-mark question in exactly the same format as it was for paper 1, but also a 20-mark question on paper 3 that I will discuss in more detail later on. To start year 2 theory and methods, we're going to look at this part of the specification. You might want to make a note of some of the points that I'm going to be looking at in this video, so if you haven't already done so, get a pen and paper and add this as your title, if you're making notes on paper or on a computer. If I said to you, I'm going to pick this apple up from the table and toss it into the air, what happens next? You'd all have an answer. If I then said why, you'd also all likely have an answer. Or to put it another way, you will most likely have provided me with a theory explaining what happened and why. Now, as a sociologist, you're not really interested in theories of apples, but you are interested in people, and that's the starting point for sociology. It might be worth making a note of the definition of what sociology is as a reminder. We're going to be looking at how sociological theories explain the social world. By way of an example, just imagine that you have a friend. You've arrived at their house, and I want you to actually act out how you would ring this doorbell, as if you were to actually press it. Did you do, as most people would, and reach for the doorbell like this? Or did you use your thumb like this? A recent study for the National Doorbell Ringers Association found that an increasing number of people, young people in particular, are using their thumbs. Why, you might ask? One theory is that young people are so used to touching their mobile telephones with their thumbs that they do things such as ringing doorbells with their thumbs as well. Remember though, it's only a theory. Another key idea in sociology is the idea of socialization. Add a complete definition of this important term to your theory notes now. When looking at the idea of theory, we also use the term perspective. In fact, I'll use this term interchangeably with theory. It's important to remember that everyone has a perspective, but you don't necessarily have to agree with it. For example, I've never been to the pyramids in person, and I never imagine it from this perspective. Nor this, nor this. But we need to focus on sociological perspectives. Therefore, going back to your written notes, write this as a subheading. When we talk about perspectives, it's just a way of seeing something, but we need to be more precise with regards to sociology. To illustrate this, and the idea of perspectives, think of your previous school. It's up to you if you want to choose infant, junior, primary or secondary. The main thing is to describe what your school was like using your own words, your perspective if you like. To illustrate the idea that in sociology there are many different perspectives, but they're all looking at the same thing, i.e. society, and each have a different view of what the society we live in is like, hence they may disagree, I'm going to use the example of education, or your school. Everyone has a perspective on school, but they won't all agree. They'll be looking at it according to their own view, or lens, if you like. This will be shaped at least in part by their own experiences. For me personally, I can recall my school days being filled with joy and happiness at each new discovery, winning the small school's six-a-side tournament with Preston Canova Primary School, and so on. But what I recall as a positive experience, my perspective if you like of school, is like to be very different from the boy on the other side of the room who was asked by Mr. Cole if he was sitting open-mouthed for the purpose of catching flies. We were quite adept at making up our own nicknames at school, but the teacher handed us flycatcher on a plate. If you were to compare your account of school, would your perspective be exactly the same as anyone else's? Hence, we all have a perspective. This may or may not be different, but what is similar is the idea that every perspective is looking at the same thing. In sociology, each perspective is looking at society. Another way of thinking about the idea of perspectives is to try and find the big bad wolves version of the events that took place in Little Red Riding Hood. I'm sure you can imagine the scenario though, without finding the actual version. As you already know, there are a variety of perspectives in sociology. We're going to look at these in more detail as part of this topic, and then their links to research methods. It's important to consider where sociology came from, and its origins can be traced back to what is known as the Enlightenment period, a new era that, as the name suggests, shone light where there was previously darkness. A new way of thinking emerged, and we can add sociology to that new way of thinking about society as well. We're already familiar with the process of industrialisation, for example. I want you to think about some of the fundamental issues that need to be considered when looking at different sociological perspectives or theories. The first one is this: are people the puppets of society? In other words, are you like the individuals in this picture? Are you controlled by something that exists over and above you that controls your actions and behaviours? You can note in this diagram that the thing is in fact called society. The question is, does society control you? Or, in answer to the question, are people the puppets of society, perhaps you might think that this is a more accurate picture. Here you might note that it's the people, the individuals, who are pulling the strings. Instead of controlling or creating society, here the individuals are actively creating themselves. These are major issues, hence we need to look at them in a lot more detail. But as a starting point, we can look at how traditional sociological theories can be distinguished from each other, according to whether they adopt what is known as either on the one hand a structuralist, or on the other what is broadly described as a non-structuralist approach. This is what these two pictures are supposed to represent, and you should make a note of this now. To add a written explanation to the general meaning of structuralist approaches, or structuralism, then we might say something about how it sees the social institutions as existing outside of us, but making us act in the way we do. Again, you might want to press pause as you make a note of this. In contrast, the non-structuralist or action approach pays much more attention to the individual and how individuals create society through their interactions. Hence, you might find it described as social action theory or interactionism, amongst other names that we will have a look at. Because of how they see the world, the perspective of the structuralist typically leads them to what might be referred to as the big methods, the large-scale research methodology of the positivist, compared with the small-scale view of the action theorist, who prefers to look at things in greater detail using methods that generate qualitative data, as preferred by interpretivists. Another distinction between structuralism and action theories is the use of the terms macro and micro. A macro perspective will look at society as a whole, whereas a micro perspective focuses on a smaller area of society but does research in much more detail. Crime provides us with quite a good example of this. For example, are factors in society causing people to commit crime, or is it more to do with individual choices, circumstances, or interactions? This distinction sometimes helps as well. Are we caught in the web, or are we creating the web? Education also provides us with an example of this. Were social class differences in achievement the result of external, wider social factors, or internal, inside the school factors? As we can see here. Structuralists can also be divided into whether they think that the structures of society provide us with consensus or prevent conflict. You should make a note of this now. Remember, both functionalism and Marxism are structuralist theories, but where functionalism sees this as generating consensus, the Marxists see them as preventing conflict. We'll look at these theories in much more detail. The third main issue to look at is gender. When thinking about theories, it is useful to consider how they relate to each other. Make a note of this diagram now, and we will refer back to it in a number of future lessons. It might not all make sense immediately, but it will do very soon. This is a reminder of the key terms covered in this section. We'll look at some of these in a bit more detail next time, but for the moment, just check that you understand what they are.